Welcome to the Big Woods Bucks podcast. I'm your host, Hal Blood, sitting here with my buddy Lee Shands, my co-host. And today, we've had him on before. We've got Garnett Robinson, my old buddy and guide from way back. And this podcast is really going to be a tribute to Garnett's uncle, Gordon, who was a fixture in the Forks, Maine. Anybody that ever probably went through the Forks or spent any time there would know of Gordon. He owned the store down there and stuff, and he recently just passed, and we wanted to do a little tribute because he had a big impact on the community, not only down there, but from to Jackman to wherever in between. So anyway, so that's what this podcast will be out. We'll probably tell a few funny stories, good stories, and learn about Gordon a little bit.
Yep.
And he was 71, you said, when he passed?
He was 71, yeah. It was kind of tough because, I don't know how to eulogize a hero.
Yeah. Yeah, he had a big influence on your life, right?
Yep.
You started
Between him and my Uncle Ronnie, those were both my heroes Ronnie Berry and Gordon Berry, so.
Yeah.
They both taught me how to hunt. I wouldn't have shot all the deer or caught all the fish or trapped or gold pinned or done any of the stuff I've done really without having them start me. So
You told me you used to spend your summers in the Forks. Your mother wanted you out of the house, so she drove you up the Forks and left you there, right?
yeah, I'd stay there. Well, used to be like when I was really young, I'd go for a couple weeks at a time, and then when I got a little bit older, I think when I was 13, and then I don't know if my Granny Barry wanted me there because I ended up staying the summer, and we talked about Bob Wag.
Yeah.
I stayed the summer in Whipple Pond, and I'd come out on the weekends. But I was probably the luckiest kid in the world when I stayed up there because my Uncle Ronnie worked in the woods, and he would pick me up in the morning, when he's heading in like 4 o'clock, 4:30. We'd go down and fish the river, and then I'd get chores, whatever I had to do at the store or around there. My grandfather believed everybody had to work, so I'd work, and then Gordon would take me to a pond every night. So, and I'd go to a different pond and go fishing. So I learned both the river and the ponds and fly fishing. So I did that I learned from both of them. All of that really. So
Learned about the woods.
I learned about the woods and I learned to sharpen saws from both of them. So chainsaws. I learned how to cut up deer from my grandfather and Gordon and Ronnie. So I wouldn't have known like you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have. I'm not a butcher, but they call me a butcher maybe. But Gordon showed me, he watched me with a knife and he was, work on keeping the knife, He knew how to use a steel and stuff like that, and I didn't, I'd be out there, but he taught me how to cut up deer and skinning, like if we were trapping or something, then if I'd botch them if I was doing it, and he'd show me how to do it the right way, so.
That's how you learn.
Yeah, so I'd do it, and that was like as a kid, I can't even explain. Like my cousin Brian actually probably hunted more with Gordon than I did. I hunted almost exclusively with Ronnie when I was little, and Gordon would have my cousin Brian. We always call him Birdie because that's what Gordon nicknamed him somehow.
He had nicknames for
He had
people.
nicknames for everybody, Captain or Chummy or.
I was surprised. I don't know if I ever told you this. I've known your uncle for 50 years. I met him when I was 9, and he always was good with kids. He liked kids anyway when they came in the store. But when I got older, he always called me Chum. Like if I come in the store, he says, "Hey, how you doing this morning, Chum?" But after I did that Throwback Thursday, that was one of his favorite words. It was an old timer, sound like something my grandfather would say. They had old words like that, but a bunch of people commented on that Throwback Thursday that called him Chum and Chummy. That was his term.
When I went down to the relatives hunting camp, that's the first time I heard that. And my uncle, who was at the time, he was in his 80s, but he used it all the time. But my father's cousin did too. Chummy, chummy, chummy. Everybody was chummy. So that's goes way back, obviously.
He did chum and captain, and this was just a bunch of nicknames. He called me Wild Man.
Is that your nickname, Wild Man?
No, he and I call each other that.
What was your nickname?
I don't know. Probably couldn't say it on here. I don't know.
That was kind of like my grandfather. My grandfather's nickname for me. I was a kid and didn't know any better, but yeah, I wouldn't say it on the podcast. But it's what my grandfather called me.
Here's a few words from our sponsors. They're all top-notch people. We're glad to have them aboard. Make sure you support them. That's what keeps us going. Being the low-tech guy I am, there's one thing I've learned to embrace with technology, and it's my Onyx. I used to carry maps and GPS when it finally came out and stuff, but the Onyx has eliminated that because I've got my GPS in my phone now with my Onyx app. I can mark everything in that. It's helpful that I can show other people by putting a pin in if I want to send somebody to a place. Being a guide, that's important, I can give them the pin, put it in there, I text it to them, whatever. So if you want to get your Onyx, get your Big Woods Bucks code, BWB, and get you 20% off, but I highly recommend it. Give you a little update, Skinner Sights. We all know they're the best site going, but it's a great company because Andy and the crew there are innovative, and they're always thinking up either new models to make a site for, improve the sites, making mounts for scopes, and now they've come on with their own line of scopes and red dots. Whatever Andy does in the company, it's top-notch, first quality, and they stand behind everything, and we're glad to have them as a partner, and we hope you'll try their sites, and you can trust your life with those, and they're going to get you the game. So get your Skinner sights, and you can trust me that you're going to be glad you did. Just wanted to talk a little bit about minus 33 in the wool they have, which I believe is best wool going, whether it's base layers or your socks or whatever you're wearing. You got to have wool. I've been stressing that for people for years, to wear your wool, whether it's the outerwear or even your base layers and socks. I've been to the tour of the plant, see how they make their socks, and it's quality, the fit is right, and they're going to be long lasting. I've got socks I've had now for several years, and they look like I'll have them for several years more before they even think about wearing out. So I trust my life to wool, and you can too. Minus 33. All right, back to the podcast.
My grandfather, and I mean, like, my uncle Gordon really showed me a lot. Last 25 years, I would say, since I stopped being a ranger, I bet I've spent 50 or 60 days a year with them, it wasn't every day like that, but I'd come up a week in the spring and we'd fish 4 or 5 different days at different ponds, or I'd go in the fall and we'd go take a fall fishing. That's my favorite, and we go into, he had canoes on, I can't even tell you how many ponds, but tons and tons of ponds, and we'd just go to, he liked the pond fish, like I said, Ronnie liked the river fish. They both, I talk to people. I've fished the river with Gordon. I've fished the streams and all that, just like I'd fished ponds with Ronnie, but they're way different on how they hunted and how they both learned from Warren, Ricker, and my grand, but Ronnie really learned from Warren, Ricker. I think I was telling you about Ricker's cabins, but back then they used to, my grandfather bring them down. They would all, the guiding then was way different, so I don't want people to think less of how they guided, but they shot deer for their sports.
Oh, that went way back. That was almost like a tradition.
They had to do that kind of, and they bring those kids down. And my uncle Ronnie and he always used a 300 Savage semi-auto, and my grandfather used that. But Gordon and Ronnie both used shotguns when they were young like that. They'd go with them, and they'd shoot deer for them, and their sports would take them, so back then, which is not, but,
That's not how we do it now, but
we don't do it now, but that's what they did,
my grandfather was the only person in my family before me that had a guide's license, and it was the same way. My grandfather shot the deer, and the clients tagged them and took them home. And back then, they weren't real fussy either. They
No.
If it was a deer, they wanted one. And of course, a lot of those people that were coming from away, most of my grandfather's clients were from Mass and Connecticut. Well, back in the 50s and 60s, there weren't any deer down there. Now there's way more deer down there than there is up here. But back then, they just wanted to bring a deer home with them. So
There was piles of deer here in the 60s. I know that. I mean, they shot a lot of deer, and they weren't all the roads and stuff like we have now. And
Yeah, there wasn't many roads, huh?
that's why the gun I brought, I mean, he basically hunted with a shotgun, and like I said, in 300 Savage, open sight. And when they started clear cutting, my grandfather started selling guns at the store, and he goes, "You need to have a scope on the gun." And after that, Gordon had that rifle, and he shot a lot of deer with it. And I personally don't do is I can't hit a running deer with a scope, but him and my cousin Brian can, And,
well, I'm sure that by the late 70s and early 80s, when they started making those clear cuts, I've talked with a lot of the guys that were hunting up here. Those deer weren't used to those big clear cuts. They'd walk right through them things right in the middle of the day. So yeah, as long as you had a scope and could reach out there, I'm sure they shot a lot of them that way.
oh, they shot a lot of. I mean, I've seen a lot of deer killed in my life. And if Gordon truth had to be known, I dragged a lot of deer. I'm like, I'd get a call, and you want to go hunting? And be my cousin Brian and I show up, and he's like, "Well, we got to drag one out before we start." I'm like, I was like, we wouldn't get hunting until like 9 o'clock or something. But my cousin, like I said, my cousin Brian, when I was 10 years old, I might be with Ronnie or my father, or it was weird. They let me hunt by myself. I was a big 10-year-old, I guess. They let me hunt by myself out, and wasn't good probably, but I'd hunt. But my cousin Brian would always be with Gordon, and so his style of hunting and versus Ronnie's style of hunting is Gordon always liked to hunt with people, And if he was by himself, he might sit. He'd still hunt. Tracking, when you talk to him, he tracked a lot of deer, but only to learn where they're. It wasn't like he was thinking he was going to catch them. Like I know he told me he only tracked like one or two, and he's proud that he got it like that. But it was more like, he knew every crossing. So they'd be like, they knew I liked to hunt by myself. If I hunted with them, they'd be like, "Here's a track, Garnett." And then they would just boogie down. They'd be looking for every crossing that was between here and the Dead River or wherever we were. And quite often, I helped them.
Do you know where that picture that you sent me last week, the one that I posted of your uncle, it reminded me kind of the deer that I shot last year, but it looked like it was just a 6-pointer, but that thing looked like it had some necks and shoulders on it.
He shot his. That was.
It was a big heavy deer.
He's got quite a few. Like the biggest one he ever tagged when we were talking was the first one he got, and I think I told you 10. Somebody, and now my cousin, and saying I was wrong, it was 12.
Oh yeah.
Or 11 or 12.
Yeah.
So I'm not I wasn't around then, but it was a 12-pointer and it weighed 248. That's the biggest he tagged. I got to say that right. But I mean, if you ever see my uncle, when I was a kid, I'm not kidding. Like, you could be riding, he let Sammy, my Uncle Ronnie shot some giant bucks, really, really big, monstrous racks there and monstrous heavy deer.
For all you big woods buck hunters, if you're looking for an ideal base camp for hunting in the big woods, in the Adirondacks and Tug Hill, you gotta call our friends at Christmas and Associates. For over 35 years, they've been providing land and camps to sportsmen, 5 to 50 acres,
rivers, streams, and ponds in some of the best locations, affordable prices, and in-house financing with low monthly payments. They can even build their Adirondack-style cabins on property you already own. For more info, call Christmas & Associates at 1-800-229-7843 or go to landandcamps.com. Visit Christmas & Associates on Facebook.
I know when they used to feed deer. When they started feeding deer, there's some monsters that were feeding at Pierce's that'd been there for a long time, and he had Sammy with him, and they were just driving in, and he see it. He's like, "There you go," letting them shoot, And if I was with him, it could be a 300-pound buck. It wouldn't matter what it was. Whoever, if he just loved to have kids get a deer, or just for me, it's like I was the luckiest kid you ever see, because I missed a lot of game, and if it was somebody else, they could be mad, if you're and no, my uncles just laugh, oh my goodness, I remember talking about running deer, and I was like, I can't hit him with a scope, and he goes, you can't hit him without it either, or something, be something like that. I mean, they'd always joke, because
I think probably part of that too was back then there was so many deer, it wouldn't matter if you didn't hit one. There was another one.
That was, remember, I think I told you, my Uncle Ronnie, whenever I hunted with him, he just shot so many deer that he just, and what's funny is, he's kind of like, how you, I don't like to say too much, because the last time when I talked about making that bikini and giving away the stuff for them, I had people writing to me like I did blasphemy or something. I was like, holy cow, they're really, how do you...
The best way to describe it, Garnett, I've already written the throwback for next week, and what I said was, if you combined Gordon's deer with his brother Ronnie, it would be on the far side of several.
Yep.
That's how I described it.
That's a good way, and I mean, and what's funny is I don't know why they didn't back then. I don't know when they started the big butts, the patch thing. My very first deer, I wanted that so bad. I was 13, and I got it, and they made fun of me. Because I wanted the patch, and my uncle never entered any of those deer into the big bucks club, and neither did Ronnie. So, and they both were guides. Way back, there's a funny story when he was guiding with Charlie Hathaway was talking, they needed an extra guide, and my Uncle Gordon filled in for, and this would have been for Northern Outdoors, but had a giant buck there. He's picking up sports or dropping them off to go in stands or something, but they had a whole truck full of guys. Big buck was out in one of them cuts, and they all shot. They were all sitting there shooting, to the point that I don't know if Charlie ended up having to tag it because they're fighting over who got it, but it was like a 250-something pound, and Gordon's like, it's right there. He's trying to point it out to him he's just driving them to put them into stands, and they end up shooting one. They climbed out of the truck, and they're all shooting at the same deer going across the cut. It's like a war. But Gordon gave up his license, not Ronnie guided his whole life, but Gordon gave up his license probably, about the time I was doing a lot, in the late 80s or early 90s. He's but the funny thing is, Gordon felt more like a guide to me than any guide I've ever been with, because he always wanted, if you were with him, if you said, if he brought you into a place, he'd be trying to help you. He'd be like, here, Lee, you go down here, and you'll find this spot. It's a good spot. And
He, whenever I had conversations with your uncle, and I used to think, because when he got older and he was heavier and stuff, and probably didn't get around like he did when he was younger, but I would talk with him about places that I was either looking for moose sheds, or that I was bringing my deer clients in down there, between the Forks and Jackman. He knew where them spots were. That was one of the conversations we had last year. I ran into him. He had a canoe stashed in on Bill Morris Pond.
Yep.
And I had one of my clients, and we were coming out off in the Redmond Pond Road, and we ran into him out at the end on the Hunter Road there. And so I always pull over anyway, and I said, "What are you doing today, Gordon?" He said, "Oh, I got to go up and check." He said, "I got a canoe down on Bill Morris Pond." He said, "I got to go check on that." And he had, I think it was probably one of your cousins with him, and I wish I could remember which one it was, but we talked a while.
Brian, because like 2 or 3 times he's seen you, and he said, "Your chum, see, ask what you're up to or something."
Yeah. So I had told him about some places, because it used to be you could go in there anywhere. I started looking for moose antlers in probably the late 80s in there on Enchanted Road and Capitol Road and stuff. Well, back then it wasn't a big deal. Now everybody and his brother's doing it. But back then, about the only person I'd run into in the springtime would be your uncle. But we were talking last year about how it's kind of sad there's so many people doing it now, it makes it harder. So I started telling him that I was getting further off the road because all the road ones had been picked. So I was taking hikes. So I would mention these places I was hiking up on the side of these mountains and looking for them. And he said, "Well, I haven't been in there for a few years," but he said, "I used to find them in there too." And we just were kind of bummed how our little honey holes, now
I was gonna send you a picture of a 4-wheeler him and my cousin had. He had 25 or 30 antlers. Like you couldn't, like when we went into,
Yeah.
But it's kind of like that where he couldn't 4 wheels all loaded up. But yeah, believe it or not, when I was little, he liked to look for deer antlers when I was little too. We go to Indian Stream, we go to Cat Heart, we go into where you had to sport, get to that giant buck up along the river. We used to go in the Dead River. There's a couple places where they yard up in there along the river, and we used to pick up a lot of deer antlers when he had a canoe stashed up on the Indian Stream up in the bogs. And, that's the things that he taught me were really like canoeing. I remember I've never, even till now when he was sick, I mean, he'd had open heart surgery. He wouldn't let me be in the stern. I was going to be up in the bow no matter what. He paddled me since I was a kid, even till 2 weeks before he died. I feel bad because he called me the day before he died, and I'd seen him. He's been sick, really sick. He had a hernia too that was really bothering him, and I said, "Well, you probably can't." He goes, "If you're coming to go fishing with me, we're going." Because I'd spend 50 or 60 days. I mean, I've picked up hundreds and hundreds of antlers with him when I was a kid. And it's kind of funny that I didn't realize do you remember the guy that used to come around and buy antlers, had really hairy chest and all that? And I don't know if you ever.
I don't think that's anything I'd remember.
No, I just remember because he'd show up at my house at 5 in the morning, wanting to. I'd have antlers laying there, and when I was a forest ranger, state paid me to look for antlers, so. Fish and hunt, I'll tell you, but
Probably the guide too.
I think who knows?
Another thing that I touched on with your uncle last year, though, and we both get a kick out of it, was I wasn't finding any deer antlers. I was basically going up and looking for moose antlers, but the last few years, because we've had those easy winters, there's places along the river and along some of them streams, the deer have actually been staying there all winter. And I told your uncle about how I was finding deer sheds every year now, and you never used to do that. But again, we've had those easy winters, and so there's a particular stream down there, and I figured that out about 5 years ago. It's the migration trail, the deer that are coming south headed towards the Forks. They use that stream as a migration trail, and your uncle told me, he said, "I'm going to tell you years ago," he said, "I used to find a lot of deer antlers down along the backside of that stream."
Yep.
So, yeah, what goes around comes around. Those deer, if they get the right conditions.
My uncle's been, he started feeding them when they killed off those deer yards way back. They basically cut them and made them smaller. And we go in there, and it made me sick. It made him sick because, Indian Stream, we go in there and, instead of finding antlers, we'd find 20 dead deer or something, Started, and then all of a sudden he started feeding them out there, and then that kind of ruined the hunting for me, because he'd be like, "No, we ain't gonna shoot no pet deer. We're going we'd we'd be miles back in the woods. I'm like, there's probably more deer right in the backyard, like, and he goes,
know
we aren't
what, though?
gonna shoot pet deer. We're gonna go and
That shows his character, though, because if you look in the last, back 5 or 6 years ago, they had towns where they feed the deer, and guys were sitting on those
well, they had to post
trails and shooting those big bucks. There's a particular town up north. I won't mention it because I don't want to really offend anybody, although I don't really care if I do. But they were sitting on that trail that came out in behind a store and just shooting the deer in December when they're coming in, and shot all kinds of big bucks. But you do that 1 or 2 years, and then you got to start all over again. It's just
Well, they did. They did. I mean, we used to. That was my uncle's favorite thing was muzzleloader hunting. So, if you ever look when he tagged the deer, it was always like the second to last day or the last day of muzzleloader because he just couldn't stand. He just loved to be in the woods, and he loved he used to hunt a lot with Sammy White. That was, he like I said, he always had a chum, and for me when I hunt with Gordon, if there's 2 or 3 of us, we always have deer. But as soon as you add another person, for me it ruined it. Because I like to hunt. I really like to hunt by myself. Or like that's what my Uncle Ronnie, when I hunted with him, my Uncle Ronnie tracked a little bit different than you outthink a deer, and my Uncle Ronnie would be just like, there's a deer in front of me, the deer in front of me. He would walk till they start to lay down sometimes, and then he had a 12 gauge semi-auto because wasn't in clear cuts waiting for him. He was just, and deer get up and you can tell the difference between my Uncle Ronnie shooting and then my Uncle Gordon actually learned from that guy I was telling you, Warren Ricker. He had that 300 Savage. If there's deer, they were shooting back then, and it's like he'd be shooting, and sometimes Gordon would be like, he's just shooting where the deer had been even, and they'd go up and the guy was a killing machine really, and he's one of the best back in the day. And
Hey Hal here. I just want to take a minute to talk about our wool gear. Our Big Woods Bucks wool gear it's the best value there is on the market. We have 100% virgin wool clothing, whether it's our packs, pants, jackets, whatever. The virgin wool it's the natural fiber from the sheep, and it wraps into a tight thread. That's what makes it waterproof, pretty much wind resistant, and comfortable to wear. It's quiet for hunting, especially in the big woods. You can't find anything better than wool clothing. So we have ours. It's all made in USA with all U.S. accessories and everything. We've got years of experience guiding and it's thought that's going into this stuff. So we've tried to keep the average hunter in mind and kept the price point at where people can afford it. We hope you enjoy it. Wear your woolies. Caught in his death.
so whenever you hear Gordon shoot, that gun that you're going to do in your throwback, I was with him the last 2 times that before he went to a bolt action, if you believe it or not, after that, because we had Brian, he dropped, whenever I hunt with Brian, my Uncle Gordon and I don't know how many deer we've shot, but it was 3 of us together, or if it was Sammy, him and I, that's when I still would have a chance. So it seems like when I was little, they allowed deer driving till and my grandfather would like to have those big deer drives, and I just never got anything. I'd be out in the middle of all these marksmen, the deer be running at me, and they'd kill it, or my cousin, if you're, like whenever you're hunting with him, my cousin Brian's a really, really good hunter, and, you feel like you're getting pushed off the side. He's one of those guys that knows to stay where he can see to shoot, I'd be in the thick stuff, like going, what the, my uncle dropped us off. We were going to hunt down by the Dead River, and he was just going to get on across, and nobody, you weren't really trying to go to him. It was just, we would hunt, and if something happened between us, and hear him shooting, and he got on the radio. I never had a radio way back, and I'm surprised. My uncle hated technology. Didn't have a phone. He's actually what I would call a walking GPS by himself. You guys are selling Onyx, and Onyx works because I'd be lost without it. But my uncle Gordon, we could go on a road, and he's good with a compass, if like. But the only thing he ever used was a bubble compass, and he'd be like, Garnett, this road has a big bend. If you don't hit it right, you're gonna wander off or something.
My father was
he
the same way.
he could go on any road and just stand there and like be like, it's gonna do this, and it's about, and when I was a kid, they were just building some of them roads, and some of those, if they dropped you off and you didn't didn't go the right way, it could be a long walk. Like we'd hunt up by Gordon Pond, or on the backside up in Shutdown or something. Like you could be like a long walk if
Yeah.
It was wild country back even when I started going down there in the 70s. There wasn't a lot of road system down there.
Well, when I was little, it was a lot different than, I mean, they were building them, cutting, and maybe that's why I got deer. They're stupid, Everybody say back then they're stupid, and I'm like, well, yeah.
Well, I don't think it was that they were stupid, but when they were opening up the woods, those deer had never seen a human being, because there was deer yards back in there. They didn't come to town and get around people to know anything, but
I bet people wouldn't believe how many deer I've shot at with muzzleloader. When they had them old muzzleloaders of junk, I'd be out there, and my uncle, I was like, how do you even like this thing? Because you go out there, and one day I see like 40 deer, because they're being, back then they'd go in the deer yard, and all the deer going in one direction, going in there, and you'd walk in, and there'd be deer going, pull back, and you hear it go, psst, like that. Then I've had times you go like this, look, and then it go poof, up in the air. I'd be like, walk out, and I was like, I don't know how you guys. I'm walk out, wouldn't go off. I'd have to go about, get a screwdriver out, take my gun apart. I'm like, who can believe it? Who wants to do this? Like up there. And
You can imagine, I always used to think about it. I started out with a cap lock 50 caliber Hawk, and that was bad enough, but I can't imagine what it would be like trying to do it with a flintlock.
Oh,
Can you imagine trying to track a deer with a flintlock?
Well, back then they probably shot them in the summer out of their garden
yeah.
or something. But I'm like, I was out there, and I like you get those big snows and that, and I was like, holy cow! And once they started getting the inlines, but my uncle had that, and they started getting radios, and I'd show up and I'd never have a radio, and they'd have to dig out, and I'd either be out there without a radio, or they'd have one. His call signs, because nobody wanted names on there, so it'd be like Big Buck. That's what Gordon's was, Big Buck, and I don't know if Sammy or Brian was Little Buck. And
Ronnie was probably Dead Buck.
Well, Ronnie 99% of the time was either guiding or hunting on his own, so really the only time they'd hunt like that is like Thanksgiving. They get there, and the last 2 weeks of the year, like I said, my cousin Brian hunted more with Gordon, and if you look at my amount of time I spent with my Uncle Gordon, I spent more time than you can imagine, because it's like 50 or 60 days a year my whole life, so it's actually pretty hard to talk about them right now. But
yeah.
When you're looking at hunting, my cousin Brian always spent the last 2 weeks of deer season, so he shot a ton of deer with Gordon, and they like to hunt the same way. You used to hunt up in New Brunswick, you said, and like my family. When you're talking guides, my family used to be guides up there, but they come out and have lunch. If you ever go up there, and they come out and have lunch, and that's my Uncle Gordon.
Yeah, make a fire, have some tea or something.
Yeah, they'd come out, and my Uncle Gordon, they'd be like, you'd go in, you do it, and my Uncle Gordon liked to see country, and he knew I can't even tell you, like if you rode with him right now, like I can ride down a road, and I know where there's probably 50 crossings on different roads. He'd stop, and he's like, let's check it, like that, and on driving, and it's almost like a cat hunter, like because he knew tracks from trapping and stuff. We drive along, and I have to look, and he'd be like, he just see that stuff automatic, even though he's not didn't consider himself a tracker, but he tracked enough to know where, like if you jump enough deer and you know the places where they go, they do the same Same things. If you're up in the mountain, and you suddenly have one shoot up through a notch, like if you're up there and you jump another deer, a lot of times they're going to go that, that's how I got my sports deers, because I couldn't get them, but I knew where they're going.
One of the things that I missed out on that my father told me when he hunted up there on the Enchanted Road back in the 50s and 60s, and that was big country back then. There was hardly anything for roads. The Enchanted Road was just two wheel ruts that went into Lower Enchanted. And I don't know if I ever told you this. My uncle Stubby McAllister lived in Carrollton.
Yeah.
So they still have that camp on the backside of Lower Enchanted. They don't use it much, but my dad, that's where he would spend a week or two in the fall. And because there was no road system back then, my uncle Stubby knew where the crossings were.
Over by shutdown and that, what we were just talking about, yeah.
He always had it was more like a hatchet, but he called it a belt axe. But he had trails that went to all the little bogs in the area. And so they would walk, and they'd drop my father off. It might drop him off at the second bog, and then they had the third bog. They had John's Pond and all Little Gordon, all those ponds. I never got to experience that because by the time I hunted up in there, it was opened up.
Road, yeah.
But it was real similar how when we first went up, when we went to Ontario, it was all thick woods and there was hardly any cutting. We hunted near all those bogs. The only places where there was open country was along the streams or around those bogs, and you'd get into some open areas. So that's my father. When I got back from Ontario, my father said that's how we hunted in Enchanted area when I was a kid. We had trails that went to all those bogs and all those little open swamps and stuff, and that's where you hunted because that's where you saw the deer.
They crossed those beaver dams, and they cross them, yeah.
Cross on those beaver dams below all of those.
Sheets out, yeah.
It was an open area where they feed would grow,
Yep. I always, when I was putting out sheets, I did that. One time I didn't want to, back then I was so poor, I'd build my stand. Same with probably wouldn't want to climb. My stands are probably as bad as my Uncle Gordon's. He wood and, like whatever. But he had one on Indian Stream that, boy, says the most killingest spot in the world if you could shoot. And my cousin Bobby shot at 5 different bucks one morning. Never got a single one, but I don't know what he was using. He, went through a whole box of ammo. It was just deer would come out and, yeah, Gordon had a lot of spots like that. He just, I don't know, and he just loved to take kids. Like I said, last year, his son Gordy got a deer in he has a seat that's, if we were late and something, and he just had one spot that he'd go, and there's so many deer that cross there. And they come out from the river. He has a camp up on the Kennebec. Yeah. Tucked away up in there, and he was looking forward to this fall. He wanted me to buy a jet boat, so he could get him up there. It's like he used to go in just with a canoe and stuff, and I never see my uncle with a life jacket. And I was like, Gordon, you're gonna have to put one on. He goes, you planning to make me swim, or something like that? And I'm like, well, no, but I'm like. You're not in shape enough. He goes, well, don't make us swim, But he go in the fall, and he taught me a lot about, because I hunted from a canoe with him, and I hunted, that I never would have done before. And back when he was trapping, he'd have me sit down, and he'd have his rifle, and I'd have a shotgun looking on the banks, and if there's something further, he'd have shot it or hand me his gun to shoot it, but. No, but he taught me really way back, he was a canoe, he won the Nationals with Alan York, and come in second they broke the front of their canoe off up in the river there, and they sat in the back, and they were bailing, together, and they come in second with that. They were offered to go to the Olympics, but, you got to stop working, and my family, he had 6 brothers and sisters, and my grandfather, probably this is where Gordon learned all his helping people around town and stuff, because he had, if you see Reno Valancourt, he's from down Madison. Yeah, I consider him my uncle because he lived there, and so they had 6, 7 kids, and they only ate deer and moose until they was out of school. So that's, and way back then my grandfather would say so and so, or needs a deer. like, and they would shoot, like, if this lady wanted to make mincemeat, she'd go tag a deer. Like, here's your deer, here's your mincemeat, or, like, and my grandfather, like, and they would just help people, like, I don't know. My uncle just did a ton of stuff around him, plowing.
I called him the unofficial mayor of the Forks. That's how I described him in my thing. That's how I think people thought of him, because again, when I wrote that throwback on him, I've been reading all the comments and people that I didn't even have any clue, like Paul Laney. I didn't realize they had a camp up on Indian Pond when Paul was a kid. His father had a camp up there, so that's where Paul hunted when he was a kid, and he said it was a big deal to go to town and tag the deer so that he could see your uncle. And not just him, but all kinds of people that I had no idea had a connection with your uncle, but did.
Well, when you're doing your throwbacks, that's what's kind of weird is I know a lot of the people when you were talking about, Gene Letourneau and like Gordon. I told him you did that show, and Gordon loved it because I was telling him there's a bunch of times we see him going in by his camps at Toby or he had one in Ellis, but if you go in, see him in the road, he'd never get out of the road. He'd just sit there looking at you. Like, when there's other, I forgot, used to be the chief warden. He lived, oh my goodness, I forgot his name now. Gordon, he was cutting wood and he was like in his 80s. My friend, uncle was like, get out, Garnett. We're doing wood. I always used to go out and do wood with Gordon, and once in the fall, we'd always go as a group with Billy McKay, and we'd fly around, look at, Gordon and him would be figuring out where they're going to hunt.
Now, is he the guy that had the nice little camp up beyond the store that sits
Yeah,
up on the
yeah,
hill?
and his
He's the
sister-
guy that he got killed in the plane
Plane
crash, right?
crash, yeah. And he had
I
the-
met his daughter a
Katie,
while ago.
yeah.
Yeah, she almost died in that plane crash
Yep,
too.
yep, and his son-in-law, and they had, we used to, they're from town, the McKays, if you go there, the Yorks, Carol York, and they're,
I think, didn't that McKay, wasn't he tied into that big grocery store down in Waterville? Didn't he
Yep,
help
yep,
manage that or
yep,
something?
he did.
That's what I remember.
Yeah, he did, and he's quite a fisherman hunter, and then you go, way back, they had, I don't know, it's like in that Gene Letourneau's book, Colin Bates,
Yeah.
he's quite a trapper and a hunter. I mean, they're all pretty much the same. They just they just loved to hunt, fish, trap.
I'm sure your uncle would have been, coyotes didn't really explode up in that area till like the 60s. You started seeing them more, and then by
The first one, and I saw the first one that came to the store was with Bob Wegg and Walt, and I see him with the lynx. That's the first time I'd seen a lynx. But I saw the first bobcat, and that was like in the, probably like mid 70s, and that was the first ones that they trapped, and then that's when they really started, once they started clear cutting and getting around the yards, it seems like that made it worse, because when they started shrinking those deer yards.
Sure.
They cut around all. I remember seeing those guys, and they'd be like, "We're not cutting the deer yard," but I'm like, if you're shrinking up the,
Right.
you're getting the smaller areas they got to stay in, because that Indian Stream, I can't tell you, you go from Greenville and from south of there and Moncton, there's just all the deer trails would converge on that.
Right.
Same with Cathart, between that and the river, we go up there and we pick up deer sheds, and
Yeah.
I remember showing you a deer shed way back, and Hal knew how to score. He's like, "That's like 150. Where'd you get that?" Or, because I picked up a 7-pointer one time on one. This is actually when they were doing a push. I was going across. I got 7 antlers, and I'm like going like this, and then I found a moose antler. All of a sudden, I jump a big buck. I'm holding antlers, and I'm like, oh, because I'd rather get the deer than. So I put all those antlers there in a pile, thinking I'd go back, and they stayed there.
Did your uncle
Except for a 7-pointer.
did he sell his moose sheds, or did he keep most of them?
Sold almost all of his moose sheds. In the deer sheds, he's got probably every deer shed except for he met a guy that's just really, he liked him a lot, and he sold a set of sheds for $1,500. So that'd tell you how big they were. They would have been over 200 inches if you could kill it. But it was, there's two or three like that. Ronnie killed a couple sets like that, they just monstrous.
'Cause I saw years and years ago, I was coming out I think the lower Enchanted Road, and he was coming down the upper Enchanted Road. But anyway, we met, and he had a set of moose sheds. It was a Boona, and he'd found both sides of it. So I didn't know if he kept any of them.
Oh,
or
he
sold,
got, he got
but
a,
it was like a 200-inch bull. It was big.
he had a 25 pounder that he had. I've got,
That's big.
yeah,
Anything over 20 is big.
I got two that are giant. The same with Gary LeMay. I don't know if you know him. He used to, when you go back then, Gary LeMay and him trapped, and they also looked for antlers. But back when I was little, the guys I remember seeing doing it then were Francis Lassard. Met him and Glenn Feeney, and there's one other guy. I can't remember, but that was back then. I remember I needed the money, so mine would stack up, and then I'd be like $4 a pound, $3 a pound. Yep, all right. I got paid for a moose antler, and
I tell people all the
I
time,
did the same thing.
yeah, we did. I remember.
if I had just saved all of those moose antlers that I found back in the 90s and stacked them somewhere, I can't even begin to tell you how much money it would
I
be.
went in with Hal into a spot, and we had like
Cleaned
19
house,
or
didn't
20.
we?
Yeah, we brought out 19 or 20 browns. Well, Gary,
Remember we went in,
I had to walk out. Remember, I had a trail going across, and you had a 4-wheeler.
Yeah.
So I had it for snowmobile, and then he's like, I can go through there. We drove up, and he brought his 4-wheeler, and we get up on the other road. I'm not going to say exactly where we were, but probably there's never moose there now anyways. But he's like, I had you, me, and Gary all riding on. I riding on the front, and Gary's on our back of the 4-wheeler. And we drove up in there, and then like Hal got to ride out with the antlers. But but I left a John. Remember, I kept piling up all the old ones into a big pile, and I said, well, we'll go back. When I just left them in a big pile of old ones, and
Yeah, we never went back.
never went back. Yeah.
We found that in the winter. Remember, we went through there in
That's
the winter.
right. We got like 6 or 7 on that one road.
Yeah.
One gravel pit, you got 4 or 5.
Yeah. And we said, we got to get back here in the spring.
And then there was good.
Cleaned house.
There's a wicked.
People they couldn't even imagine how many moose there were back then. Just when they were telling, what they used to tell us, they thought there was like 70,000 or whatever. Can you imagine how many there really were?
All I can tell you is like when I was a forest ranger and they paid me to drive in the woods, I'd be in there in the spring just beating the forestry truck through snow, and I haven't found I used to find antlers just riding the roads, just picking them up out of the roads in the spring, and then I would go back and walk the state wanted me to know my unit for the first 2 months of the spring. They wanted me to check where the moose were. So and that's the same way I go with Gordon. Like I tell Gordon, we got to go to these spots, and Gordon knew every spot, and I just funny you and I met Gordon. I come out. I thought I was following Gordon. Him and Hal are the only 2 people like me that you go in the woods, don't have skidoo gear on. They have wool pants or whatever. My uncle would be out there I don't know. He's immune to cold, so he'd be wearing a flannel shirt and no gloves or something, but I thought I was following him. I'm like, what's he doing like that? And there's you wearing your fur hat on.
Yeah, my rabbit fur hat. Yeah. I was out talking to Gordon. I said,
I remember that. I come out and I go,
get out there, and Gordon's standing there. I go, where's Garnett? I knew Garnett had
brought him in there, yeah.
I said, that his track back there? And he goes, yeah. I said, he'll be right out because I already checked the other road.
Yeah, I come out and I was like, Gordon, come in here. We were going every other road on the way out, and I was like, who come through there? And I didn't realize. I'm not gonna say where you were, but I was like, oh, I come up, and then I realized you come up by the pond down on the other end, but yeah.
How far north because I always ran into him, down close to the Forks, but did he make it up this way some too, or did he always?
99% of it, my grandfather grew up with the Merenties in town here. He had a giant family, and his father died when he was pretty young. So he lived up here with the Merenties, and But so Gordon would probably, like, he'd come up here chasing girls, go to Canada, something like that back in the day. But he really, if you drew a line across 15, like that
south
and
of-
that, and then like, the upper Enchanted Road, he fished Rock Pond or something before and all that. But everything from there south down into,
He must have spent a fair amount of time up around Indian Pond because a lot of people,
tons in there.
a lot of people commented on the throwback that they met him up around Indian Pond.
Well,
so
he had
must
fish pond camps. I don't know if you've been in there.
No,
Like,
I don't think I have.
the old set of, they're still there. My cousin's Gordy stays in there a lot.
Oh, yeah.
An old set of sporting camps. You go in there, and if you see Junior Dwyer, has the fire station. That's another thing. My uncle was on the fire department for 40 years for, rescue and all that. They call because he's at the store. But Junior Dwyer's dad, he knew all the stories. That's what I'm going to miss the most is, like, I hear all the stories of the old trappers and the old hunters and stuff that he knew as a kid, and Junior Dwyer, if you see it says Junior Dwyer Fire Department. Well, they had this Junior's father was killed. They used to have a train go through there, and they drop people off, and they did at Turner, at those camps, and they go in there. Like, I don't know if you ever saw the last caribou shot in Maine. Used to hang in the store there. It was shot in the 30s in Moxie, and Gordon had it in the store for a long time. But that fish pond camps there, and there's you go in there, it's kind of neat because they had all the old where they used to write in who was there, and it'd be from the 20s and the 30s. But those camps are old. We go in there and fish like once a year, and go in with like Harry and them, it's just trout in it and stuff.
Now, when you mentioned that, because I'll tell you a story about, well, he wouldn't be my uncle, it'd be my great uncle, but you mentioned there was a caribou in there that somebody shot in the 30s.
Yeah.
Did they shoot that in the Forks
It
somewhere?
was in Moxie.
Moxie, because my great uncle that lived in Caratunk, him and my grandfather were in World War II, but he saw, after they shot one, my great uncle saw a caribou, didn't shoot it, but saw one like around 1940, and supposedly they were all gone, but he saw one down in that country somewhere.
When you fly over the Johnson Bog, I remember being with Billy and them, and they said a lot of those old trails that you see in there had been caribou way 100 years ago, but
Number 5 bogs that way too.
they got trails, and I always thought it was moose, and he's like, no, a lot of that was caribou from back in the day. I've got a picture of my great grandfather. My family's been guides. Like, if you go down to, they used to guide for the Hales, which would be Yankee magazine. He wrote a book that says "Making of Yankee," and it's got a whole big set of pictures of. You've seen some of the pictures of my great grandfather, but I got a picture of my great grandfather and my grandfather, and there wasn't. I probably shouldn't. They were market hunting because
Right.
they had a pile of caribou, so I don't want people to think bad of him. But he's a guide.
Well, people
Well,
did
but
it back then.
they were shooting them to ship them out. So I got a picture of him on a wagon filled with caribou, and I got another one where they used to shoot a lot of really big deer back then. Big.
Did he
funny-
tell you about, like, if they shipped them out on the railroad? Because I'd heard this from Hal, and I'd also heard it from my father, that back in the day, when they shipped those out, they didn't want the antlers on them because they took up space and they got hung up. They'd take their belt axe or whatever and knock the horns off those great big bucks and just throw them down over a bank. Or,
I know-
They didn't care nothing about the horns.
Well, I don't know. It's funny. As much as Gordon loved antlers and stuff, he let a lot of them go.
Yep.
So I mean, it's like he loved picking up sheds and all that. Loved deer and I don't know. I mean, but the funny thing is he really just hard thing for me to explain. He just loved last year when having his son shoot a deer in his spot. He went up and my other Brandon, he's my other cousin, and we'd always talk. He's a boxer, so he'd talk about boxing, and he'd be like, but he was so happy that Brandon shot at a deer and missed it, and like Gordon used his scope because the way he hunted, a lot of times he'd shoot across the river, So I mean, that river is wider than you're thinking spots.
Oh, I was
I found that out, so
I was really glad last year, because you never know, right? You don't know when somebody's time is up. But Oh, back when when he had his guide business up here in Jackman, I'd always guide from the first week. Well, then when he started doing it down at Parlin, I guide up here the first week. Well, last year, my client shot a nice buck, 8-pointer, not huge, but like 175-pound 8-pointer. And I said, well, we're closer to the Forks than we are Jackman. I said, we'll bring it down and have Gordon throw a tag on it. So I went down there, and your uncle tagged that deer for us, and
would have loved
that's
that.
always going to mean a lot to me now, because it's, he'd tagged deer for my clients before, but that was the last one. And so
I had a funny with a tagging one because my nephew read your book, and he got it, and he wanted to track deer. He'd never tracked one, and his name's Nathan Sear, and I was like, all right, we'll go. But it's like he showed up when there's like, they let him have a week off to go with me, and he showed up, and there's like a knee deep in snow. And I'm like, I can't even. We drove in there, and it took all day, and finally found a set of tracks across the road. And I'm like, I couldn't tell which direction they're going. I had to go in under trees, and I'm like, he goes, can we follow it? And I'm like, it's like 2:00. I go, what the odds of, catching a deer like now in knee deep snow? And I was like, I get under there, and it took me a while feeling around. I was like, well, that does look like maybe it's a buck following the does. I don't know. I said, have at it. Well, he goes and he takes off, crosses her, and he goes, I'm at a road. And I said, well, yeah, as soon as it starts to, you haven't got long. Don't, goes, and he got out of earshot, and he shot one. So I was like this, and he comes back on, and I go, where you at? And he's like this. He goes, I got one. And so I took forever, and I had to drag it out. Well, my uncle hated technology, and they just switched the tag into the computer.
Yeah.
And we come out, and so I do like this. He's so happy. He got this. There's a 7-point, like probably like 180 pound. It wasn't a giant deer.
nice deer.
It was a nice deer, and it was like it's Thanksgiving week, so it might have been heavy at the beginning because you look at it, it had a nice rack and all that. It took forever the way I dragged it out. Downhill, uphill, back, come out to the road, and I barely could go. I was in there and snow up there, and he come out, and we went down to tag it, and my uncle couldn't figure it. He goes, well, do you guys know how to run this computer? You're not supposed to be, like my nephew gets in there, and he goes, I can figure it out. And he puts it in, and, West Forks is right there. Well, he hit West Gardner, so we're sitting there, and the warden pulls in. There wasn't, wardens talk to Gordon because you can't have other people, filling that out, but he didn't know how to run he's sitting there and didn't know how to run and it's just about dark when
He had a good alibi.
so he had to hit him just like that. Well, and he's the type that'd be like, well, take your tagging station then if you're gonna make me run the computer or something, but had that, and so the warden showed up and they asked him. I'm like, believe me, we didn't drive from West Gardner up here to get that deer, we got it right here, but it's funny, he's like Gordon but for him, he's just so happy to, he see a young fella get one. He had the muzzleloader season. Him and Sammy had a young fella with them, and they all had their muzzleloaders, and they had, I can't remember if the deer is like 170. If you looked at it, you'd say it's a 200-pound deer, but it'd run itself right down to nothing. That kid shot, then had Sammy's gun, and had Gordon's gun. And he finally got the deer. I don't know if that was his first buck or not, but Gordon was just so happy that and he was excited. I had a little girl I took hunting last year. Her name's Lily Murphy, but her father's from Ireland. So the Murphys are.
Yeah.
And her little brother was in my wife's class. My wife taught the public pre-K and got cancer and passed away. And so and her father never hunted, so they asked if I'd take her, and she got 152-pound doe on the first day of youth, and I was like, well, maybe she won't go. I didn't realize you can keep shooting deer now. So she went with me, and then she I see why Uncle Gordon likes. That's why I like taking kids. I think because or women or whatever. Everybody's like, you sure you want to take women, Garnett? But I'm like, I like people who haven't shot anything, like to go with me more than. But she was shaking right here. We had a little crotch run come up by, and then she'd seen I have a deer hanging on the walls like that, and she goes, well, I figure you're going to show me a bigger one. Like, we see, and it's so fun to go out like that. And I got them all. My Gordon was all excited. He was going to take her out trout fishing, because he just the whole idea she hadn't caught trout. Her father runs a farm plus construction. He's the workingest man you ever see, and so he's like, he doesn't have time, and he was so happy that I was taking her out hunting. I was like, I didn't know my protege was going to be a little girl, so yeah. It was kind of fun to, like, when she had that deer, and I was like watching her shaking, and I'm like, I want to feel that again, like I wish I could, it's kind of funny. Like when I was with Gordon when I was a kid, I can remember being, you see me make a lot of mistakes from being excited, and when I get one, they'd be just all pumped for me. So
when you're a young kid,
I want to be like that again, because like I'm now when I shoot one, I'm like, oh, I'm all done. And I think now I should do what you guys do and go to some of these other places, because you can't keep going. You get in trouble.
when you're a kid, you just want to fit in, and it just makes you feel good that you can hang out with some older guys. I think that's why I've always had older friends. I think it's because when I started hunting and fishing, everybody I was going with was 10 to 20 years older than me. But I just wanted to do what they were doing and learn from them.
My Uncle Ronnie, and like I said, I hunted the most with Uncle Ronnie. I hunted with Gordon the first 2 weeks, and then my cousins and all that would go. And I'd always hunt 1 or 2 days a year with my cousin Brian, Gordon, and I. From the time I started, my cousin Brian would be on here. He would tell you, because he's a good storyteller. He just probably wouldn't be able to talk to you like this, But I can't remember a time where we didn't get something. You know what I mean? Like every time we go, it'd be like my uncle knew these, and he'd never go to this. It's just weird. He never wanted, like my Uncle Ronnie is entirely different. He'd be more like you, would like figure the deer out. And my Uncle Ronnie would always tell me, Garnett, if you can't get a buck in 3 days from there, go put your gun away. Because he'd figure, well, I mean, that's not true, but I mean, like, he goes, you got to, first day you're figuring them out, next day you're figuring out what they're doing, the third day you ought to be getting after them, like that. And he's just like, and then if you look at Gordon, we get into a spot, have a bunch of deer, and come out, have that lunch, and then we'd be in a different spot. I'd be like, why are we leaving? There's deer there, and I'd be like, by Gordon Leslie, he knew so many different spots from. When I was little, we used to go across the Dead River and go over by, like Otter Pond and up through Pierce Pond. That's only a mile or two from the store.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Pierce Pond is right there. Most people don't realize that. And
when I first got my place up in Pleasant Ridge, I was taking my hunters. I'd do because Hal would
go down.
He'd stop. Yeah, he'd stop. Guiding up here. He'd got his job with Remington, so I didn't have to come up here anymore. I started going up in Pleasant Ridge and staying there for a week.
Remington. I need a new one.
But anyway, we would go up there around Pierce and Otter, and you're right on the back, just across the river.
Right there.
That place is crowded now. There's a bunch of Vermonters that go in there and set up tent.
They go, but they don't hunt right. I shouldn't say that. I don't even take that wrong.
Any tips, right?
I'm not going to give no tips on here. I'm just saying, like, I've hunted over there my whole life, and I'm like, when I used to go with Gordon, there's a lot of places that still don't get hunted right.
Your uncle told me when he was younger, that south side of the Dead River all the way over to like the Long Falls Dam Road, that was a huge deer yard.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
That place was just full of deer.
We went up and we used to go up and look for antlers along the river some, and he had a lot of his hunting is up like Enchanted and Moxie are really his, in Capital, I guess everywhere. I don't know. Yeah. I started to say his spot, but he just like, I don't know. He didn't
have to leave home too far to get to some good spots.
No, he could go and like and same thing with fishing. He loved the Fork so much. Like I said, we go over and I brought him over to Rockwood, and he hadn't been there for like, how far is Rockwood?
I know.
Close, and I mean, like, I need, the one thing I wish I'd been able to do more, and he always wanted to go up like up by Ross Lake or something, because I come out from up there once with a truckload of sheds, and I went and brought him and Gary met me up there. It was quite a long, I can't remember when it was now, but I was in by Salmon Pond, Pine Stream,
Yeah.
that country. And like I used to have a camp at Northeast Carry, my father did, but we'd go up I went up and brought him up in there, and as soon as they went home, they found one off the edge of a little side road, and I found the biggest set I've ever found. I think I was telling you, like if I get on my knees and stand them up, they're taller than me. They're just but I kept that set, but
I don't know if I've never asked you this. I don't know if you were ever in there with him, but I had a place up on the Upper Enchanted Road. It's all gone by now, but I found that probably, I don't know, 20 years ago. And it was beautiful. It was skid trails through a fir cut. And for like 4 or 5 years, I went in there every spring and would just like fill my back of my pickup with antlers. Well, then I went in there one year, couldn't find nothing for antlers, but found some boot tracks. Well, come to find out, your uncle had found out about that place too, and he beat me in there.
I used to go in and around to that backside there quite a bit, but it was the ones that really killed mine off is the Matt. When Matt and Jake, like when they were kids, I remember going in where we'd gone. I'd made that trail in there, and I remember going in. And I went down the other side towards Baker and down in that way, and all of a sudden I come along. There's these two little kids. They're sled. Isn't this wicked, Garnett, or something? I'd be like, and the same with Gordon. We used to go into places, and after a while, we were like, we'll go back and walk this down. Don't drive up into, like some of the places that, like up through the cuts, because as soon as you take a sled into something, everybody will follow you. So, one last thing I'd say is like, my uncles, and I'm pretty sure, I don't know if Heaven's got fishing or hunting, but last year I got baptized just like you did. So the wild bunch here, I got baptized, and I said, I read the Bible a little bit, Lee, and it says you got to be fishers of men. So I said, well, I'll start with the two hardest critters going. I'll start with Gordon and Harry Abraham. We were fishing, and I went in, and I said, you know what, guys, I just got baptized, and I'm praying for you. And then they both said, well, we know you, Garnett. You need to pray for yourself. And then and that was funny. And then I went and took Gordon up in a place in Chase Stream. Well, I come back out, and I had to have a little video where I nearly I went up, all the roads have washed out, and around here we had and I drove up on 2 feet of snow, and my truck started going to a hole, and I was like, said a prayer, backed out, and I showed him where I backed out of. I said, God got me out of this, Gordon. It works. Prayer works. Well, this spring I see Gordon again, so I'm still working on him. I went
casting out there.
he's sitting behind me, and we come out, and he outfished me by quite a lot. He's done it. I was like that, and I come out, and I said, telling everybody at the store, I said, he might not admit it, but he was back there praying that he could outfish me, and he did. And Gordon goes, you know what? You got to do what you got to do to make it work. And, and then I think it worked, because that's where I think he is. He's up there hunting and fishing right now. So.
Yeah.
That was good. That was good for me too. I think the word they use is cathartic, but I feel good about, this whole thing. Your uncle touched a lot of people, and he was a good example to, kids and stuff. And he treated people good. People liked him. I had one of my uncles we called him the mayor of Fairbanks. I don't know if you know where Fairbanks, you know where Jack's Trading Post is?
Yeah.
It's just between Farmington and New Vineyard. My uncle, he didn't run Jack's Trading Post, but he lived right beside it. And, but everybody knew my uncle and loved him. And same with yours.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna miss him, and I hope my nephew still go up, and he'd love to go to the river camp with Brandon and Gordy and Darren Bissett. He'd opened for famous country star, and they had all the. And I really hope they all go up there, and I hope they all shoot a big buck, because that's what my Uncle Gordon would want. He wouldn't. He goes, get him chummy or whatever. I know he'd want them to. He'd want them to be up there, and he'd love to see. Last year with Gordy getting one, I hope Brandon shoots a big one, and hope he shoots a big one with his dad's gun. So.
Well, whenever you're out hunting and fishing, he's looking down on you.
Yep, that's what I'm thinking. Yep.
Good.
Yeah. Well, this is good. Yeah, he's a good man, and he's one of them guys that I didn't know him real well, but I know him good enough to know that, in the guiding business and being around small towns, there's always the rumor mill and all that, and I've never heard a bad word about Gordon. Never. So it tells you the kind of guy he was,
Character. Yeah.
I think he loved people too.
Yep, he did. He liked to be with. If you go hunting, fishing, I mean, for him, it's always better to be with somebody. He'd rather have somebody, and he'd love to have somebody that didn't know. He had this Wayne Kinney that owned Belangers. For the last 10 years, they'd fish a lot of weekends. And first he goes, he's kind of green, Garnett, but I'm teaching him now. Now Wayne's a good fisherman, and brought him to a lot of spots. He just loved to have somebody to go with. So I know he was happy to do it.
So is your cousin
Brian,
Huh?
Brian or Brandon,
Brandon, is he taking over the store?
he's taking over the store. He's working hard right now, because Gordon always liked to do the morning and all that, and well, Brandon's working hard anyways. But I'm just saying he's taking over his father's shoes, and kind of hard. And it's hard when you're thrown into it and you don't, weren't ready for it.
I think Brandon used to take the later shift, because when I'd go in, I'd always be driving up there early in the morning. So if I showed up at 5 o'clock, your uncle was the one that was in there, and Brandon would come in later.
Something about he worked in the woods when he was a kid, and did. He didn't just work there. I mean, he'd worked in the woods. My grandfather had a logging outfit, had all kinds of stuff, so they did. So he'd once you've done that, once you've worked in the woods, you can't sleep in. So I'm up at 3 in the morning, and I can't stop it. My cousin Brian, and we're all so we'd go down there, have coffee and stuff, and then Gordon would just be basically dreaming up where we were going to go, what we're going to do, and then as soon as he'd get done, as soon as the morning shift come in, he'd off and going, so.
Yeah. Well, Garnett, this was great. We're glad we could do this and give Gordon a little respect he deserves. A lot of people listening for that, watching.
Well, I appreciate it, Hal, and I guided mostly because his wife was a great cook. But he's I've always called Hal my Uncle Hal, because he's same age as my uncles. If you look at Ronnie and Gordon, they're basically close to Hal's age, and they were my heroes.
He still calls Deb the boss.
Well, I do call her the boss. She when I worked for her, she was the boss. Go out there, and I was like, those guys are in the camps. She'd tell me what to do and where to go, and
and you did it.
And I did it, actually. I went fishing and stuff with her, and she'd let me pick the spot, but she probably was gonna fish. Something, so.
Well, good. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone. Make sure you support our sponsors. That's what keeps us going here, and maybe say a little prayer for Gordon and Garnett. And until next time, good luck on the trail.